Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I am joined by Paul Murphy, TD for Dublin South West, Gary Gannon, TD for Dublin Central, and Mairéad Farrell, TD for Galway West.
Thank you, Maeve.
My first question is a simple question. Has the left lost its mojo since 2020?
Yeah, to some degree. I think 2020, the main thing in the election was a big mood of ordinary people looking for change in a progressive left direction. There was a big momentum behind the left, and that sense of change, vote left, transfer left, was like a grassroots sentiment that emerged. I think now things are more complicated. There hasn't been, with the exception, a very, very important exception of Palestine, there hasn't been significant street mobilisations of the left for a couple of years since the cost of living protests, when you had 30,000 people on the streets. Obviously, we have the rise of the far right. So things are more complicated in terms of why. I'd say COVID, like there are objective things. COVID cut across a momentum towards the left. We couldn't really have mobilisations. The right was mobilising people. That was complicated. But then I think there is real responsibility on the trade union leaders for not mobilising people on the housing crisis, the biggest crisis that we have in our society, not saying we're going to have big, big protests and directing people's anger in a left-wing way. And I would also say, in the friendliest way, that some responsibility on Sinn Féin. I think Sinn Féin had a sense of, okay, we're in a good position, just keep it steady, don't rock the boat, tell the establishment that things are going to be okay, play things pretty safe, don't really get into mobilising people. And I think them as the biggest political force in the Dáil, then that left a certain vacuum that the far right has partially been able to fill. But I think we shouldn't be pessimistic either. It's not over yet. We can put, this can re-emerge, and that's precisely why we called for a new vote left, transfer left pact, to put it back on the agenda in the local elections and into the general election.
Mairéad, like we've seen Sinn Féin had a good performance in the 2020 general election, but looking at the recent polls, Sinn Féin seems to be on kind of around 27%. How would you respond to what Paul has said about, maybe has Sinn Féin lost a bit of its energy? Is it not as radical maybe as 3-4 years ago?
Well, I suppose, like if you do look at the polls, and the polls isn't everything, because it's not really necessarily just what indicates people's support and also what people's feelings are, and particularly in terms of their views and vision in terms of the left. Like, I mean, obviously we've increased in the polls, so, since the last general election, and that, so I don't really think that's necessarily a point at this moment in time. I think in terms of people's views and hopes, like at the end of the day, it's about people fundamentally hoping that change will be delivered, and particularly materially in their economic position. And people had that very huge sense of hope in that 2020 period, which was so different to the 2019 period. If we kind of look at it like that, it was night and day, but people had that hope. And what we have seen in the last 4 years is that the housing crisis has significantly worsened. The people's lives in terms of their housing situations have significantly worsened, and it can be very hard to keep that hope going over that long period of time when you don't see any material changes in your life. I was just talking to Maeve, who works in my local office, and we hold clinics every single Monday and most Fridays. And I always think that's a really good kind of look at what people's views and hopes and fears are, because people come into me in that half an hour and they tell me things they don't tell their best friends. That's how it kind of goes. And me and Maeve were saying, we didn't think that this time last year we could see the housing crisis getting worse, the way it's impacting on people is getting worse, but it is now. And I think that it's really important for all of us on the left to make sure that we're clear, concise, and offer really viable alternatives as to what people's lives can be, and that there can be betterment. But I do think COVID felt like a lot longer of a period of time even than the last 4 years could have been, because it dragged that out. So I suppose on that, I think that maybe people don't, the energy in terms of their hope might have fallen. But, I still do get it when I'm talking to people. Like, people do still believe that there can be change. And we are seeing a growth realistically if you're looking just at polls in our support.
Gary, I saw a video recently where you had a bit of an incident with Captain Pepper, who I believe is running in the locals. You called him a fucking gobshite, I think. Do you think that, has the far right, is the left suffering because of the what some people would say is the foothold that the far right is gaining in working class areas, in areas like the area that you represent people in?
Yeah, and just to be clear, like in terms of the question as to whether the left is losing momentum, I don't believe that for a second. I believe what has happened over the last 2 years, definitely COVID, but then into the kind of the rise of far right, the left is actually finding a grit in a way that we hadn't done before. I mean, we are mobilising around the most important issues of housing, of health, the water charges, for example, previously. But now we're mobilising around in the For All groups. We're mobilising around the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign. And we're finding our fighting and a grit in a way that there's a real kind of resurgency of what we won't be willing to compromise on. And I think there's great training in that, but it's also probably what the left needed in this country, is a sense of actually collective grit and what we're willing to kind of force through. So I see a great kind of space for remobilising, re-energising, taking the fight against these far right. And look, I don't even want to mention that fella's name because he's an absolute clown, but he's not representative of the communities who he's spreading fear into. What we're fighting back onto is mass disinformation campaigns coming through online platforms. We're fighting that, telling us that people are coming here in search of sanctuary as somehow a danger to areas. And what I have seen is people involving themselves. So, for example, I mentioned the For All groups, the East Wall For All group. 18 months ago, we heard about kind of mass protests down in East Wall outside the centre where children are living because of the East Wall For All groups, because of the local football teams in East Wall, Besbury. You don't hear about that anymore. And it's an incredible way of showing what can happen when leadership happens within a community and that dissipates. I think the challenge for us is finding that kind of value-based collective voice within the left, but also acknowledging we are separate entities. There is no one homogenous left viewpoint. I mean, I have all, so in terms of vote packs, for example, like that, I can't knock at somebody's door. I will be saying vote left, transfer left always. I will be voting 1 and 2 in my area in City for 2 Social Democrats candidates running. It'll be Eoin O'Callaghan after that. I'll be voting Breed Smith. But I don't have it in me to tell people, I stand over me and the Social Democrats. I can't stand over every other candidate in any other party. I do say we should be voting across the left, but I also have to stay true to the team that I'm a part of, but knowing that where we share values and where we share policies, we move mountains to enact them.
Well, just on that, Paul, your party, People Before Profit, recently wrote to the Social Democrats and Sinn Féin and basically proposed a voting pact for, I believe, just the local elections. What was the kind of thought process behind that?
Yeah, I mean, we also wrote to other left groups, some of whom have come back. I mean, Social Democrats have indicated through the media they're not interested, and Sinn Féin hasn't responded. We're hopefully we'll get a response today. But the basic idea was to say that this country has been run for over 100 years by Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael. The consequence is a country where 2 people have as much wealth as the bottom 50%, where corporate profits through the roof have tripled in the past 10 years, and yet where we have 14,000 people in emergency accommodation, we're failing completely in terms of our climate targets with the cost of living crisis. Ordinary people are really, really struggling in this quite wealthy country. And the reason for that is not just because of bad policies from Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael, it's because of class interests. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael represent those that get rich from the housing crisis, the corporate landlords, the private developers and so on. They represent those that get rich from the health crisis. There's 1 million people on hospital waiting lists if all those people were everyone was getting access to good public health care, there wouldn't be any money to be made by Larry Goodman and the rest of them. And they're the people who are responsible for Ireland's contribution to the climate crisis, including agribusiness. So we think we need to have a government that stands on the side of ordinary people, that takes on the vested interests of the rich in this society and fights for the kind of like eco-socialist change that we want to see, where the wealth and resources is used in the interest of ordinary people, not the interests of the super rich. And as part of that challenge, we think that the next election, the local elections first and then the general election, people should be given a very, very clear choice. Stick with the current coalition of chaos of Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, with the Greens, or maybe with some right-wing independents, whoever replaces them, or here's an alternative left government. We're not expecting Sinn Féin, Social Democrats to sign up for everything that we're saying, but we do think like a basic for that is we should at least come together and say, we're not going to go into coalition with Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael. People in this country have memory, like time after time, of voting for Labour's way, not Frankfurt's way, and then ending up precisely with Frankfurt's way, for voting for the Green Wave and ending up with them going into government. We need to give people an alternative based on ruling out coalition of Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and some basic left principles, and give that choice to people. And I think that would give people hope, because I think precisely the issue is that people's horizons are a little bit diminished about what is possible. Whereas, like, I think what happened in the 2020 general election, as opposed to 2019, I agree with Mairéad, it was a very different election. And I think part of that was, this is our opportunity. We could actually get rid of Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael. And we should put that on the agenda. And that means ruling out coalition with Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael.
If I could just ask...
Can I just say though, like, say after the last general election when we were actually doing negotiations for programme for government,
yes,
you didn't want to take part in those.
Not true. We wrote to you looking for discussions repeatedly.
No, we
voted for Mary Lou McDonald. And we put forward, we came together with Thomas Pringle, Catherine Connolly and others, and we came up with a programme.
We asked to meet with you and you didn't.
That is not true, Mairéad. That is not true at all. We met with you a number of times, and we were the ones who kept writing, and we voted for Mary Lou for Taoiseach.
If I could just ask
I know,
Mairéad,
and we've had this conversation.
If I could just ask you, Mairéad, like people looking at this might kind of say like that it's it's another example of kind of how that sometimes the left can struggle to unify. And what I would ask you is, if the left can't even agree on a vote transfer pact, how would they form a coalition government after a general election?
Yeah, and I think me and Paul had this conversation before when I had the really bright idea to say yes to going down to, what was it, your summer school?
It was the Rise Summer Camp.
Rise Summer Camp in the middle of nowhere in Galway. And I went down, and then Paul wanted to film it. And I said, Paul, there's no way in hell you're filming a bunch of people like berating me for the whole thing. But anyway, it was actually a good crack in the end. But, yeah, I know, but it was more crack because we didn't film it. It's just easier to talk. I knew nobody in the audience would kind of repeat back what I was saying. But anyway, so we had this conversation, and to me, it does actually fundamentally. I fully believe Paul, and I think when we had that conversation, in general, I do think that what ye have been saying is that ye would support a Sinn Féin, I'm not just saying, say if we ran enough candidates and got everybody elected, it was a really good election, blah, 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 right? But we needed a certain amount of support. That you're talking about supporting externally rather than supporting internally. But that is what I have heard, right? Now, I'll just finish on this point. I think fundamentally what people, if we have a situation where, and people can disagree with me in this room what they think left government is or isn't, right? But say if we do, in my view, have a left government for the first time with Sinn Féin in power, what we will need is stability. We will need to have yourselves, the likes of yourselves, actually coming in internally in government, because if we have the financial levers, etc., then we'll need to be able to actually work on that. I also think that working people who have been screwed for decades by successive governments, but have also seen, are here now about billions that we have available and how great our GDP is, while their economic situation is getting worse. They'll need stability from us, and it won't be a situation, in my opinion, where you can have an external support and an internal rather than internal support. That's my view.
Gary, if I could just ask you about the Social Democrats' position on the voting pact.
Yeah, completely. And with the greatest degree of respect, like I'm looking to win, in order to have that left government, which I want, and in terms of commitments, I mean, that would be my preference absolutely after the next election. They'll be the first part to call, hopefully beforehand, in terms of what our red lines are, what we're willing to advance, what does our public housing look like, what does our NHS look like, how do we achieve that? But in order to do that, I'm looking to win votes on people that are not in this room. We need to bring people to our way of thinking. And it's the first part of the call for that is to start off by telling people what we're against. We're not going to win them over. So I get the fact that we get them make say, oh, well, we need them out, and we absolutely should. But we also need to go to people's doors who otherwise would have voted Fianna Fáil, who would otherwise maybe be taken in by these anti-immigration sentiments that are percolating around. And I have to convince them to our way of thinking. I hope PPP can do it. I hope we can do it in the Social Democrats or Sinn Féin. But I'm not starting that process but I also kind of taking on everyone else's thing that I can't be, like I'm not in PPP, I'm not in Sinn Féin, I'm in the Social Democrats. When I knock at somebody's door to bring them to my ideal of politics, that's what I'll be staying true to. So I get that it's a kind of more turgid, more difficult form of campaigning that's not easily kind of explained in a room like this, but that is how I believe a left government is achieved, by bringing people to our way of thinking who wouldn't otherwise have to have held those beliefs. And there's no other way of seeing that achievement happen.
Do you think do you think the Social Democrats might reconsider its position if the far right makes gains in the local elections?
I'm working every day to ensure that we don't get anyone of that air over the line in my constituency. So yeah, absolutely. Let's sit down after the local elections and look where we are, because we'll have a better sense of where Ireland is at this moment in time. But in the first instance, like, we have to fight them at every single door, and that's genuinely what we're doing. In terms of, I can stand over that in Dublin Central. In terms of the 3 candidates we're running, that is every door we're going to. We're trying to win back people door by door. So, and we're trying to sell a vision of what can be achieved in Ireland. So yeah. I do think for the first time we are at risk of far-right gains, which will make the centre-right, which is also to the right, pull even further to the right, and we need to stand against that. And the things that we're unwilling to compromise on is the treatment of people who come here in search of sanctuary. That will be an absolute red line for us. And it's me pulling the debate further to the left, door by door, is what we do. But yeah, but also, I mean, I sound like I'm quite hostile to the idea of a pact or anything like that. I try to work in collaboration across the chamber with Sinn Féin, with PPP, with the independents who I sit alongside. But like, that's where that should be done. It's good parliamentary work, but actually door to door is different.
Paul, other than, you know, a voting pact, a formal voting pact, do you see any other ways that the left could work together to ensure that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael don't get another 5 years in power? Yeah,
I mean, one of the things that we need to put much more energy into, something that PPP obviously focuses on, is mobilisations. I actually think, in a negative way, we're seeing at the moment the impact of mobilisations on politics. So you have, you know, a kind of right-wing social movement that is quite small. Like, relative to the water charges, this is quite small. You know, 2,000 or 3,000 people on the streets, far right are delighted. Water charges, we repeatedly had 100,000 people on the streets, with 74% of people refusing to pay. It was really a mass movement. But you can see the impact of this right-wing social movement in terms of dragging politics, including, unfortunately, Sinn Féin, on the question of migration to the right, and kind of reframing the debate and allowing the problem to be migrants, as opposed to the problem being the developers, the corporate landlords, the real, actual problem. So I think we need to be mobilising people. I mean, I think there was meant to be a Raise the Roof protest about housing on the Tuesday, when then the results in terms of Stardust was coming out, so that had to be put off. But I think, like, it needs to be organised. There's a protest Saturday week, 2:30 at the Customs House, which is important in terms of housing. I think, like, we need to mobilise massive ordinary people on the issue of housing, and, like, in doing so, then raise people's sights about what's possible. Because again, I think when people's horizons are low, the idea of, you know, never mind getting the whole cake, I can't even really get the working class can't get a bigger slice of the pie, and so therefore the idea of fighting over crumbs with people living in tents, you know what I mean? That's where that gets some resonance. Whereas if people begin to feel their own power, like they did, you know, above all at the time of water charges, also repeal, well, then people's sights are raised and about, okay, let's go after those actually at the top. I mean, I've seen some incredible stuff on Facebook. The other day, I was looking at a Facebook page and there's pictures of all these tents, and it's like, why are these people treated like this? They get everything. They're in tents, getting 40 quid a week. That is not everything. Like, we have to have higher horizons for Irish homeless people, for everybody, than living in a tent and getting 40 quid a week. And I think a movement can do that. And I think we need to have more of a focus on that.
Mairéad, are you seeing the same sort of issue with, immigration being kind of weaponised by, I suppose, what a lot of people would describe as bad faith actors? Are you seeing, you're in a slightly kind of different constituency to Paul and Gary, you're in a more rural constituency. Are you seeing the same issues there?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to answer you and talking to the microphone, so I can't really look at you. But I'm sorry. I feel really rude, but here we are. I'm sure I've done worse. I suppose so. I have a kind of I feel like me and Catherine, obviously, was talking earlier. Like we have a unique constituency in the sense that we have the real urban centre in Galway City, and then we have really rural, isolated areas in South Connemara, then the bigger towns like Clifton in the north, and we have 4 islands. So I'm out canvassing every day, so it's great because you kind of do see what's coming up in the doors. Now, obviously, immigration is coming up a bit, but it's not coming up to the same extent as you would imagine it would be if you were looking at social media. But I actually really do think that there was a problem with all of us on the left not speaking to people, I suppose, on the issue when the far right started kind of gaining started getting out there, and they obviously were using very simple, plain language. And I have quite a good relationship, to be fair, with PPP in Galway. And one of the things that we were saying was, like, as soon as we hear, there's a group of people going into an area, we should go knock doors, talk to people, actually have the conversations with people, so that people kind of understand what's going on, and listening to people. But I do think the way the government has totally messed it up, we had kind of a pact, I suppose, in Galway, where we were a few of us were kind of come together and said, we want to do that, we want to be proactive, we want to get out there. And unfortunately, the government just handled it. They wouldn't even tell me as a local TD what was going on, so we couldn't get out and talk to people. But I think it's important for us on the left to talk to people, to talk to them about the issues, but then also to bring it back to the economic issues, which is obviously the main issues, and we need to give people hope in that sense. And at the moment, people will obviously lose hope, and then when there's that kind of loss of hope, it's so easy for far right actors to go in and to talk about, claim that it's the immigrant that's the problem, rather than the fact that, why do we have billions of a surplus, yet at the same time we don't have enough houses? Why is it that people go into Galway University Hospital, into the A&E, and don't get their ectopic pregnancy noticed for about 5 hours and nearly die as a result of that? That's obviously not the fault of somebody who's fleeing war, but it's obviously the fault of the way our society is structured at this moment in time. So I think us getting that information out there as much as possible is obviously extremely important. But we need to look at how are the far right doing it in terms of their social media, and that you can easily end up in a social media rabbit hole and suddenly believe something, you know what I mean, because all the information is there. Are the left using social media to that same effect? A lot of the times, I think, even in media in general, I won't name the shows, but I do the shows. You have to feel the same. You're trying to answer a question and actually have a discussion on something, and you can't. Because if you say anything that's a little bit different, it's like, oh my God, you're talking off the wall, and you're like, no, I'm actually trying to discuss this issue. So I think that the media in general also we need to look at.
Gary, would you agree that the far right and the sort of protests that we've seen, the growth of the far right and the sort of protests that we've seen in your constituency, do you think it's a gift to the government?
Yeah, but in my constituency, nobody self-identifies as far right, though. And that's the problem that we're dealing with here. We're working off a well-worn playbook where you have a couple of kind of semi-intelligent actors taking kind of playbooks that they're seeing play out in the UK or in the US, and kind of mobilising around that fear. And that for a very short space of time, they do tap into something. And the only thing that I see is the way of fighting back that, and has been kind of, just as Mairéad said, was kind of sitting down and reflecting on how we were talking to people, or if actually we'd lost something of ourselves over the last couple of years. So has a kind of people that have kind of been mobilised with fear and hatred, I don't think they're lost, and nor do I think can we see them in that way. I think we need to kind of look at the issues that are behind a lot of it. I think COVID was devastating to people's mental health. I think the isolation that was kind of experienced throughout that period, when all you could do was look at your phone and be met by some absolute gobshite in the US, like on a radio station, sending something back to you about kind of migrants. I think how we challenge that is by staying true to our values. So, and actually standing over them proudly. So even like in terms of the attacks on a trans community and stuff like that, and like never ever equivocating in their language of kind of standing up for people who are oppressed, be they trans, be they migrants, and actually pushing back against that. And I think that's the only space for the left to be. And in terms of that's where that solidarity can happen, I think that is the role for us now. It's actually seeing where that playbook and who's the target of the playbook, and actually being more true to ourselves and pushing back strongly on that. So, and actually I have seen a huge amount of success within that space. And I really do think like we give them too much credit when we call them far right or far right mobilisations. I mean, this room in here is like, if you've got this room in here, there's a couple of hundred people on a Sunday when it's sunny out. No group that self-identifies as far right would ever get that. Like it's kind of, in any of their meetings that they're having, like the left still are in a very good place, but I also think we need to just remember kind of the convictions that we have, the collective struggles, the oppressed peoples that we need to bring into those struggles, and then link it all around kind of the actual economic bread and butter issues of access to health, access to better education, healthcare, and actually the building of kind of public amenities around kind of cities or rural areas.
Well, just on that, I might ask you first, Paul, just on the left, and it's, you know, reminding people of the left's principles. We recently had 2 referendums that were defeated. You know, yourself, Gary, and Mairéad's parties, you know, backed the referendums. I mean, given you know, given the concerns that a lot of people with disabilities and carers raised, particularly about the care referendum, and the feeling that, you know, yourselves were kind of listening too much to NGOs and maybe not listening to actual carers and actual people with disabilities. Are there any lessons, do you think, for the left to learn from particularly the care referendum result?
Yeah, I think there are. I think that's a good question. I think listening more and engaging more with the disability rights movement, I think, would have been important. I'm not saying we necessarily would have come to a different conclusion, but considering this, I mean, from our point of view, we were in a bind. We weren't the government. We opposed what they were doing. We tried to amend it to mean that there would be meaningful rights for carers and for disabled people. The government rejected those amendments, and then you're left with a binary choice. You can vote to keep the sexist language in, or you can vote to keep the sexist language, to take the sexist language out, but to have this like wholly inadequate language, very paternalistic and so on. So that left us just in a bind. That's the nature of a referendum. I think like it was a good thing, just to be clear, like even though like I was on the opposite side, it was a good thing that there was the emergence of this movement of people who were calling for yes, no on a progressive basis. There was a difference between the no votes, you know, a 6 or 7% difference between the no votes, which indicates something like, you know, 6 or 7% of people voted no on the second one for those kind of very consciously progressive reasons, listening to disabled people, and that was a good thing. I wanted the gap between the two no's to be as large as possible. Do you know what I mean? Indicating that conscious thing. The only other thing, though, I'd say is that, like, you know, partly in defence of calling for a yes vote, is like there isn't going to be another referendum. Let's be honest. Not under this government. Sinn Féin had said that they would run a different referendum, and said so afterwards, after the referendum, and then got a backlash, and then I think that was like kind of shelved. Maybe Mairéad can.
No, actually, we never said we would.
Okay. But
I'm going to that now.
So I just, you know, in terms of like the truth is that obviously the no has been used by the likes of Mike McDowell and so on to try and drag things further and further to the right, in a way that I think like the vast majority of ordinary people, if asked to vote again on repeal or same-sex marriage, would still vote in a progressive direction. But they're attempting to use this to have a whole new narrative, which is there's the backlash against all this, like, progressive woke stuff, like being able to marry whoever you want and being able to have like control of your own body and being able to have abortion instead of going to Britain. That's all nonsense, and we need to kind of roll that back. So I do think, I think there are lessons to be learned. We have, I think, begun to learn some of those lessons, and I think for example, it was very good that you had this movement and it's forced the withdrawal of the Green Paper in the aftermath of the referendum. That's a progressive outcome that kind of flows out of the referendum as well. And I really hope that we're going to see the disability rights movement as like an important factor in politics over the next while.
Right. Do you think maybe that, the referendum results, is it an example of, parties like Sinn Féin maybe not having their ear to the ground as much as they had, a couple of years ago?
Well, I actually have a funny story about this, and it involves the ditch. But I suppose, first of all, on that, realistically, all the parties kind of came out and supported yes. But I was at a door, and this woman came out really exercised about the care referendums, and I was, talking to her or whatever. And she goes, and if it wasn't for Grip releasing that Attorney General advice, we'd still not know. And I said, I think that was the ditch, And she goes, yeah, sure, same thing. And I wish I'd recorded it. But I thought it was brilliant. But anyway, so I suppose on that whole, on the care referendum, do I think we don't have our ear to the ground? I can't move and go away without somebody telling me what they think, you know what I mean, about something that I've done or said. And we're out on the doors and we're holding our clinics, and we all live in at the end of the day, every single one of us lives in our communities, and we talk to people every day. And I always think, I live in an estate called Merview, and anybody that knows Galway would know Merview, but it's a very active community. So we have the post office, the butchers, all that kind of stuff. You go into any one of those, somebody's going to tell you what they think. But people were very exercised, I suppose, in relation to care referendum, and isn't it good actually that people came out, voted, and also got actively involved. And at the end of the day, we had to make a decision and a call, which all of our parties did, and we called for a yes. And at the end of the day, I've been probably on more losing sides of referendas and elections than I have been on winning sides. But at the end of the day, it's the democratic right of the people. People need to make their decision and they need to vote, and that's what it fundamentally comes down to.
Gary, would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, but in terms of lessons have to be learned, I think we made our decision too early in the campaign, but I also think the NGOs that were referenced, they're just advocates of people. There were also the advocates, the people who the advocated on were in those rooms also. But yeah, I think there's lessons to be learned. I think, and also being able to kind of have the courage when you kind of see that you're getting it wrong, not just wait because the wind is blowing a particular way, but actually because the argument is being won in a particular direction, that actually being able to come out and say, actually, you know what, we got that wrong and we're changing quicker. I think that's a lesson that'll certainly be taken with me throughout my time in politics, because it actually should be okay to say that, and I don't think too many of us across the spear are willing to do that, ourselves included, at that point.
Paul, what do you see? Are you feeling kind of optimistic or positive about the future of the left, kind of from now until the next general election?
I think it's very open. I think it could go either way, I really do. And I think a lot depends on choices that are made by political forces, trade unions, about what we do over the next year. The local and European elections could go badly, and still the general election could represent a chance for change. That is what happened in 2019 and then 2020. But obviously good local European elections for the left should bode well. I go back to it because I think it is the central question, is the question of coalition with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. And the answer, and we've been round like this in loads of debates with the Social Democrats and Sinn Féin, and the answer is always, but the people have to decide, etc., etc. But you have the right to go forward to people and say, these are the governments we're willing to form. We're not willing to form a government with Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael. And I genuinely believe, I'm not messing, it's not some like cheap political point, I genuinely believe that would have an impact on politics in a big way. Even in terms of some of the people who are currently, slightly down the rabbit hole, slightly confused, because people have a real sense, like you meet a lot of people on doors who are just like, fuck you all, You're all just the government. People don't understand the difference, you're all just politics. And like, I get that. Because time after time, people have been made promises at election time that are then broken. Pat Rabbit famously was, isn't that what you do during elections? You just make promises that you have no intention of keeping. So I genuinely think like an indication from Sinn Féin, from ourselves, from the Social Democrats, from the Socialist Party, from people coming together.
You're really into this pact.
I know, but like,
but it's not just a pact. It's like ultimately this is.
You haven't got an indication. I've been quite clear with you in my response today. It's actually not something that I believe is the best direction.
Exactly. No, but I'm just arguing for.
We're not evading the question.
No, I'm not saying. No, I'm not saying you're evading it. But your answer is to explain this, and I'm saying I disagree with that. I don't agree with your answer, and I explain why. Because I think there is every chance. Let's be honest. Here, Gary, into this audience, is saying, oh no, I really want to be left. And I agree that that's what you want. But is it more likely that Social Democrats enter a government with Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael, or in a government excluding Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael after the next election? It's more likely they're in government. Similarly, the reality is Sinn Féin is preparing to govern with Fianna Fáil. That's the truth. That's what the Davy stockbrokers thing is about. That's the truth. And again, I agree that like Mairéad's preferred option is this left thing, but like, as it stands, the numbers aren't going to be there, and they'll do the deal. And people will be disappointed, and more space will be open for the right.
If I could just ask you on that, Mairéad, like, how do you, Sinn Féin, one of its, keywords or buzzwords is change, and how do you reconcile this promise of change with, Sinn Féin's refusal to rule out government with Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael?
Like, at the end of the day, right, what we want to do and what we're hoping to see in the next general election is obviously that we emerge as the largest party. Who knows what will happen between now and then. Like, I lost my local election seat in 2019 and then got elected as a TD in 2020, which I really didn't expect. So things can obviously change. What we want to see is getting in the largest party. We obviously want to see a left government. We've always said that. In terms of pacts, like, if you look at it, and if you look at the way elections have been in the last general election, like, a huge amount of our transfers did get left people elected, and that's the way it has been. I wouldn't be here, and I think none of us wouldn't be here if we don't fundamentally believe in our politics. We're not in this job for the crack. Like, we just happened to end up. We were political activists who ran for election thinking we wouldn't get elected, and then it kind of spiraled. And now we're here. But that's what we fundamentally believe in. I fundamentally believe that Sinn Féin is going to deliver that change. I think if Sinn Féin is the largest party, I would love to see other left groupings come in. But I also think we need to have a conversation in general about democracy and economic democracy and all that kind of thing. And my mother, who comes from a certain part of Germany, is always talking about this, whereby it's actually letting people see, democracy kind of in action. We talk about mass mobilisations. We also need to look at the political education that we have here. It's extremely minimal, but we need to make sure that we as the left are also engaging in that type of political education. We also need to look at community groups actually having power and bringing that we listen to what they're doing, what they're saying, and also delivering on it. We look at people's we look at the way power is centralised here. It's so centralised. Even if a residents group, say for an area, or a community group come together, particularly focused on the delivery of affordable housing, there's no affordable housing in Galway City, and that's what they want to be focused on. The powers in the local authorities is so minimal. So we need to be looking at democracy in its entirety and not just always exclusively looking at the ballot paper. Obviously, that's important. Obviously, I want to see Sinn Féin in government, naturally. But we need to be looking at democracy in all its aspects.
Gary, would you like to be a minister in a Simon Harris-led government after the next election?
I won't be.
Imagine.
No,
which one? We'll pick.
I think you'll be fine. I won't be a minister if Simon had led Fine Gael government. Like, I mean, that just won't be happening. But I also need to stay true to my own principles in terms of what I'm advancing as a social democrat, and in terms of the type of Keynesian economics that I stand for are different to the type of economics that Paul stands for. And like within that space, I have to go out and knock at doors and sell my vision for people to Ireland. And it's harder. It really is. But like, for me, that's what I'm choosing to do. And then afterwards, absolutely, I would love to be sitting down in a room afterwards with Paul, working out a programme for government. And within that space, though, Paul would need to commit to actually being part of that actual wanting to govern within the country. And I don't think PPP have really done that yet. I think PPP play an immensely important role in our democracy. I actually think they really have all the admiration in the world for what PPP do in Parliament. Mm-hmm. But in terms of actually the turgid work of having a pen in your hand, the allocation, the budget and setting policy, I haven't had a commitment from PPP that's the role they want to play in their republic. And so maybe they should... I don't want to maybe should answer that. This is not a news talk interview, but it's like...
Yeah, I'm really...
It's not gripped either.
Yeah.
On that note, I'd like to thank our three guests.
Can I answer?
Thanks very much for joining us, and look, we'll leave on a positive note. You know, hopefully you can work together. We'll pray for the best. Thanks very much, guys.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thank you.